Hey y'all, welcome to another video. I wanted to get another podcast out today after that disastrous live stream last night. You know, I kind of watch bits and pieces of it. I don't normally go back and watch my own videos, but I wanted to see how that turned out, and it really wasn't that bad. I mean, the interview with the Yeti crew was horrible. But that was my fault. That wasn't their fault. I know everybody's an expert on audio and sound mixing, but with the software I'm using, what was happening is I was getting sound routed in through OBS, through my desktop, and through my mixer at the same time, and one of them had a bit of a delay. If one of them didn't have a delay, you would have never known there were two sources of sound, but that's what it was, and I figured it out in the middle of my interview with Neoma. So hopefully the next time I do one of those, it'll be better. I'm not going to quit. I'm almost so damn determined to get it right. I almost want to do a live stream tonight, but I'm just going to put out a podcast. So thank you guys for all the encouraging words on that disaster last night. I have not heard from the winner of the contest, Clint C. Clint C is the handle for his YouTube channel. If he'll get in touch with me via email and send me his address, I'll get him this drone out. But as of today, it's about almost 24 hours later. I hadn't heard a word. So let's get on with this podcast. I got one story. It's about a doctor. I think you guys are going to like it. Let's get rolling. All right, here we go. Here's an email from a man who wants to keep his name undisclosed, but he's a doctor. He's a physician. We all know what kind of education these men and women go through. Smart person. Here's what he writes. For unclear reasons, it appears that the 33rd year of a man's life may be fraught with darkness and peril. After all, biblical accounts infer that the itinerant preacher from Nazareth was betrayed for a measly 30 pieces of silver during his 33rd year of life. King Richard II of England and also King Charles IV of France also met an untimely demise at the age of 33, as well as the late great soul singer Sam Cooke. Prior to his planned military incursion into the Saudi Peninsula, Alexander the Great died in Babylon on the threshold of his 33rd year. As for me, I was 33 years old in 1990, and sadly, my life was upside down at that time. 2 years out from my divorce, which was largely a consequence of my own misdeeds, I was finding little, if any, pleasure in life. My behavior had become reckless and irresponsible. I had dated many women at the same time during that era with complete disregard for their own emotional needs. Frankly, I was a cad, and an apparent dangerous one at that. I would press the boundaries of my own health and well-being by taking out my 1968 big block Shelby on Interstate 10 in the wee hours of the morning near Picacho Peak and hold down the accelerator pedal until the speedometer was buried well above the 140-mile-per-hour mark. Rest assured, this car was and still is powerful enough to transport me to another realm of existence with utter disregard for earthly remains. At the time, I just did not care about myself, or perhaps anything else for that matter. The only thing that seemed to give me any meaning was my work, and perhaps that is why I took on assignments and projects that in retrospect were not particularly beneficial to my spiritual well-being. In 1990, I elected to farm myself out to offer expertise in medical legal malpractice matters. In the fall of that year, I was scheduled to render a medical opinion concerning an unfortunate case of a man who had a delay in diagnosis of cancer, and this led to his premature demise. His estate had sued the doctor who had committed this alleged omission, but before the matter went to trial, the defendant, who was only a few years older than me, had subsequently died from cancer also. Is there such a thing as karma? What do I know? All I can tell you is that God and His universe often works in strange and mysterious ways. Frankly, as both the plaintiff and the defendant in the matter were now dead, I should have resigned from the entire case, but I had signed a contract, so I was obligated to hold up my end of the deal as a medical expert witness. The trial would be in northern New Mexico, not far from the Colorado border. The plan was to fly into Albuquerque, rent a car, and drive up for the trial to render my opinion concerning the case. As stated, I was out of sorts and I did not want to be alone. I took a girlfriend with me who had spent her entire life in the Southwest, but had never been to New Mexico. I promised her that if she went with me, we would do some sightseeing. We arrived in Albuquerque during the first week of October and subsequently rented a car at the airport. I took my girlfriend on a tram ride up the top of Sandia Peak, where we made reservations to eat dinner at the restaurant at the top of the mountain. The tram ride at Sandia Peak has the second longest non-supported cable run in the entire world. Although it was late in the afternoon, we still had 2 hours before our dinner reservation, and this gave us some time to hike along the crest trail at the top of the mountain. We hiked north towards the Kiwanis Stone House, which was a structure built by the CCC boys way back in 1930 at the beginning of the Great Depression. I'm not certain if that stone house had ever been served in any meaningful purpose during its nearly 100 years of existence, but it is a tremendous place to watch the sunset. The entire trail loop was only about 1.7 miles long, and the hiking trail was not a particularly arduous endeavor. On the hike towards the old stone structure, we passed many people who were heading back to the tram to depart the mountain. We were not particularly concerned as we were readily enjoying the aspen trees, which were now exhibiting their bright yellow fall foliage. Much to our surprise, when we made it to the Kiwanis House lookout, there was no one there. We had the whole place to ourselves. We stayed at the lookout until the last ray of sunlight peered over the top of the 9-mile hill, which was about 20 miles in the distance. Once the sun had set, it was time for us to return to the trailhead and head for the restaurant. As we walked back to our destination, it got dark rather quickly. For all the world, we were most likely the very last people hiking on the crest trail at that time. In the middle of our return journey, we passed through a heavily forested area. To our left, which was an eastward slope of the mountain, there was a steep drop-off that rolled away at approximately a 60-degree angle. That entire area was filled with thick brush and broken limbs and fallen trees. That is when it happened. 40 feet behind us and to the left on the downward slope, something came crashing through the brush. We could hear the snap of fallen tree trunks breaking. On a curious note, whenever we stopped, whatever was following us beside the trail would stop also. I was absolutely certain that we were being stalked by a bear. I would still profess that theory except for one unsettling fact. Periodically, large stones were hurled at us. Most were the size of baseballs, but one was as large as a loaf of bread. The stone would land at a distance of 5 or perhaps 10 feet behind our steps. And to this day, I'm not certain if whoever or whatever was throwing those stones was highly inaccurate and missed us by a fair margin, or perhaps more likely, it was only trying to encourage our departure from the forest at an expedient pace. Whatever we were dealing with, it was clearly not a bear, as these creatures are incapable of throwing objects. As previously stated, I was embedded in a rather reckless and impetuous time in my life. On several occasions, I would turn towards the thicket to verbally challenge whatever was stalking us, utilizing harsh threats and perhaps even professing unpleasant invectives that had rudely questioned the paternal lineage of the lurking menace in question. In retrospect, this was probably not a particularly good idea, and I was admonished by my girlfriend for my feeble attempts to provoke whatever it was that was trying to usher us from the premises. Within a few hundred yards of the restaurant and the tram left, the forest had receded, and whatever had elected to rudely escort us off the mountain never did reveal itself. My girlfriend and I decided not to stay for dinner, and we hastily departed from the top of the mountain. We headed back to Albuquerque proper, as we had a long drive ahead of us in the morning to get to the medical malpractice trial that would take place in northern New Mexico. It is often said that wisdom is acquired by the one learning from his or her own mistakes. I dispute that adage. I believe wisdom is garnished by learning from the mistakes of others. Now remember another event that had occurred in New Mexico on January 1st of 1986. The day before, on December 31st, 1985, the 1950s pop singer Ricky Nelson had died in a plane crash west of Texarkana. As I was a fan of the doo-wop and 1950s music in general, I was rather distraught about his passing. On January 1st, the day after Nelson had died, I decided to take a long drive to Mount Taylor, which was 50 miles west of Albuquerque, just to clear my mind. I was warned that the road was unsafe and unfit for two-wheel drive vehicles, but I failed to listen to this sage advice. The person who had issued this warning to me had previously broken down halfway up Mount Taylor. As stated, one should learn from the mistakes of others. I had attempted to drive up to the top of Mount Taylor on a forest dirt road in a two-wheel drive sedan, and I promptly broke down about halfway up the mountain. I waited 4 hours until someone else had come by and was able to successfully contact a tow truck on my behalf to get me out of there. I recall that it cost me a small fortune in towing fees. While I was waiting for the tow truck, I saw what I thought was a black bear standing behind a tree, periodically peeking at me from about 150 paces. Looking back now on that more remote event, I'm wondering if what I saw was not a bear. After all, do not bears hibernate in the winter? And then he ends the story with "until next time." So that's those are two anecdotal type, what do they call that? Subjective evidence. Circumstantial evidence, that's what they say on the police shows. This guy was, he was used to testifying in court, and but what a great story. I mean, I love the way he put it together, and it just made it exciting. He's a good writer. He's an eloquent writer. I really appreciate the story, Doctor. Thank you for sending it to us. We all enjoyed it.
Hey everyone, I'm Kat Ward, host of Paranormal Heart Podcast. Join me on the second and last Sunday of each month as I speak with people who share their paranormal experiences. We cover ghosts, cryptids, aliens, and so much more. You can find me on Podbean, YouTube, New Lantern Media, Apple Podcasts, and any place you find fine podcasts.
Here's an email from TJ. I'd like to think of myself as an open-minded person. I do like to do my own research on subjects and seek to find the truth for myself. And I have to admit, before listening to you, I was open to the idea of something, call it what you will, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, could be out there. But with the plethora of listener-shared experiences you provide with my own personal experiences with so many similarities, I think it's silly for us not to be open to the idea that there may be some kind of creature out there that we have yet to fully discover. I hope the scientific community will continue to look for answers. I believe one day we will have a better understanding of this phenomenon. My husband and I are both veterans. He was in the Air Force and I was in the Army. We have also been avid outdoorsmen and we enjoy camping and hiking. We also enjoy fishing, but neither of us are really hunters, although we often carry firearms when we're in the wilderness merely for protection. Thankfully, we have never had to use them. We have camped with our children across this great country of ours, And I've also been privileged enough to travel around the world quite a bit in my life. I enjoy exploring areas off the beaten track. I've never been afraid to explore abandoned places or go off on my own. I especially like being in the woods, just enjoying nature. On the occasion of our 25th wedding anniversary, I wanted to plan a special trip. We live on the East Coast of the United States and had always wanted to explore the Pacific Northwest, so I planned a trip for us to do just that. It was 2018, and our trip began with us landing in Vancouver, British Columbia. It was late fall, and we had booked a stay in Whistler. It had always been a dream for us both to see British Columbia. It did not disappoint. Every day we picked a point to head out in our rental car, and we just went. For those who have never been to British Columbia, the Sea to Sky Highway is this amazing road that runs from Vancouver north for about 250 miles of scenic majesty. There are provincial parks all along the way. We've been to a lot of state and federal parks in the United States and other countries, but let me tell you, Canada's park system is top-notch. Big, beautiful parks with excellent hiking trails. I felt like we had timed it just right. It was past the summer season and ski season hadn't hit yet, so most of the time we had the trails to ourselves. We spent every day hiking, exploring, and taking pictures. It really was awesome. When we travel, we do our best to meet local folks, so we really get a sense of what the area is all about. We also try to eat in small local diners and visit as many museums as possible. On this trip, we met many friendly people. It's funny how people will really open up to you when you make an effort, especially if it's over some good food and a beer. In several of the towns we stopped, we met the friendliest folks. One of our favorites was a guy that worked at the Squamish Lil Watt Cultural Center. I have no idea how to say that. He was a member of the Squamish First Nations people. We were truly fascinated by their art and culture. The museum itself is worth a visit. You're sure to learn a lot. We noticed that like many other Native and First Nations people, the Squamish and Lil Watt are very in tune with their natural surroundings. Their art and lore reflect that. We were especially interested in their legends of wild people and Sasquatch, which everyone we met seemed to accept as a reality of life in British Columbia. There are lots of places with names like Sasquatch Provincial Park and Sasquatch Lodges in that area. The land up there is remote. It's heavily wooded. And I guess if there were really such a thing as Bigfoot, that's as good a place as any for them to live. After our visit to the museum, we asked our new Squamish friend if he could recommend a really cool hiking spot. He told us about the Whistler train wreck, where back in the 1950s, a train had crashed on the mountain, causing a derailment of boxcars. He said the train cars were still scattered over the mountain and that it was a really nice hike across the Chicamus River. I don't know. He gave us directions, so we jumped on the Sea to Sky Highway and we headed south. Compared to the places we had already visited, this place was marked well enough. We followed a gravel road up the mountain. We didn't pass any other cars or bikes or people, so again we felt fortunate that we had the place to ourselves. The forests in British Columbia are thick. We were there on a cold, gray, drizzly day, but we weren't going to let that stop us from finding these train cars. We found the trailhead and parked on the side of the road. And since we were told it would take about 30 to 45 minutes to hike each way, we carried our backpacks with our water bottles, our lunch, and of course I had my camera. The trail was well maintained, so we had no trouble following it. It was pristine old-growth forest that I can best describe as lush. You have to cross a suspension bridge. The water's moving fast down that stretch of the river, so it's sort of a rush walking over it. On the other side of the bridge, sure enough, there were boxcars strewn about in the forest. This must be a favorite spot for graffiti artists. The rusted old boxcars are all tagged with bright spray paint. We took lots of pictures, sat on a rock, and ate the sandwiches that we brought. And then it was time to start back on the trail. It ends at the boxcar, so it's sort of a one-way in, same way out deal. Again, we were the only people on the trail. Up to that point, it had been a great hike, during which I had gotten some great pictures. After almost a half an hour on the trail heading back, I saw an indent in the woods on my left, and I headed uphill. I knew it had to lead to the road that our car was parked on. It wasn't the trail, but I took it as the road less traveled, which I'm always game to explore. Since I knew we had to be really close to the car, I said to my husband, "I'm going to head up this way. I'll race you." And without waiting for his response, I took off through the tall grass and undergrowth. Truth be told, I also had to use the bathroom. I thought it would give me a moment of privacy. So after a quick stop behind some bushes, I continued up the path. After walking for quite a few minutes, I thought, this doesn't look right, and so I stopped. It had only been 2 or 3 minutes, so I shouted for my husband, figuring he couldn't have gotten too far up the trail, and I got no response. I called his name louder, still no response. I put my fingers to my mouth and I whistled, still nothing. I did this a few times, and then I gave up. I realized then that the woods were dead silent. There was only the cold, drizzly rain, but no other sounds at all. It sort of spooked me, but I decided it was because I had just been hollering, so I continued back on the small path uphill to find the road. I pride myself on having a real good sense of direction, even in the woods. I always try to be mindful of my surroundings, taking note of little landmarks as we hike. I feel like I have an internal compass, so I can always find my north, south, east, and west. For the first time in my life, I knew I was lost. I have no idea how it happened, but I remember I felt really confused. I couldn't imagine how I hadn't found the gravel road yet. I continued to periodically call for my husband, but I never got a response. I took out my cell phone, but I already knew there was no service there. Our service had been spotty the whole trip. I continued on to what I figured to be a straight path uphill towards that gravel road. I heard a branch crack off to my left, and my first thought was, this is a bear. I knew I shouldn't start running, so I didn't want to startle it or any other bears that might be in the area, so I started singing out loud. My next realization was that I was lost in the woods. There didn't appear to be anyone else out there. So what if it wasn't a bear, but some weirdo looking in the woods, I thought. But who would be out there in the middle of this dense woods? I had nothing to defend myself with. I figured it was some psycho, or he or she could hear my tone-deaf song and either laugh so hard they couldn't kill me or they would take pity on me. So I just kept singing. Pretty good move. I continued to climb up into the brush. Some type of sticker bush ripped my pants, and I kept tripping over the tangle of weeds. Then I realized the path that I was on wasn't there anymore, and I remember thinking there was this smell there like giving your dog a bath after he had been playing in a muddy stream. That wet dog smell and all that pet owners know, but even stronger. I've seen bears in the woods before, but I can't say that I've ever been close enough to smell one, so I don't know if this was confirmation that it was a bear or not. There were more noises off to my left, and my fight or flight mode kicked in, and I started running through that brush as fast as I could. The sound was something moving just behind me now, and I was terrified. There was something behind me, and I ran so hard, and in just a short while I broke through those woods onto that gravel road. I couldn't tell how far I was from the car, but I figured the car had to be uphill from me, so I started running up that road. and I ran for what felt like miles, but I'm sure it was less than a quarter of a mile before stopping to catch my breath. I was panting and trembling. Then I realized that our car was nowhere in sight, which meant that I had gone the wrong way. I would have to go back downhill, down the mountain, and past the area I had just emerged from, past whatever was in the woods. But I thought getting to the car was the best chance I had of finding my husband, or getting help if he was lost, and then of me being safe. I grabbed a stick on the side of the road and I started downhill. I was shaking really hard. Now everywhere I looked into the woods, I thought I saw movement. I had come out of the woods near a rock with an indent that looked like a bowl filled with rainwater. I saw it up ahead of me on my left, so I knew I was in the area where I had come out of the woods. Any sign of there being a path were gone. I didn't see anything, although I now had the feeling that something was watching me from the dark cover of that thick growth. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life, thinking something was going to jump out of the woods and harm me. I always trust my gut feelings, and my gut was telling me to get out of there. I kept running until after a few moments I saw our car. Hands still shaking, I fumbled to get the keys out of my backpack. I clicked unlock and jumped in, and my husband was not there, and I started crying. I never do that, but I was overcome with fear. My adrenaline had surged. I looked at my watch. It had been an hour and 15 minutes since we separated on that trail. I thought something must have happened to my husband. I couldn't wrap my head around the time. It felt like it had only been 5 minutes. I sat there for another 10 minutes scanning the woods, half expecting to see something emerge, but desperately looking for my husband as well. Finally, I saw him walking up the gravel road. He got in the car, and that's when I really started crying, and we got out of there quickly. Eventually, I pulled off on the shoulder of the main road so I could let him drive and I could calm down. I told him what had happened to me. He couldn't understand it either, both of us getting lost like that on the trail that was clear as day going in and being so lost for so long, not being able to hear each other and not crossing paths. It was like we both got confused and lost track of time. It was such a weird sensation. He didn't see or hear anything. Like me, he had no idea what could have been in the woods behind me. I've never told anyone else because part of me feels like people would assume it was the power of suggestion, being that in the wilderness area. But I know something was not right with the whole situation. I've been around wild animals before, and this just felt rather different in my gut. I guess I'll never know what was behind me in those woods since I didn't actually see what was there. But I am 100% certain whatever it was, whatever I heard, that it was following me. I can promise you I will never hike alone again. If I had known about your channel before going on that trip, I probably would have died of a heart attack right then and there. I'm sure my imagination would have gotten the best of me. I've had other experiences in the woods, camping, hearing things at night. Two of the most vivid in my mind happened camping outside of Arco, Idaho on our way to the Tetons and camping in the Green Ridge Mountains in western Maryland. But nothing has ever brought about the fear in me like those moments in the woods in British Columbia. We plan to take a few weeks when the pandemic is over and go camping across country. I'm hoping to never have a repeat of what happened in those woods in British Columbia. And I promise you my husband will be by my side. I will be alert and I will be sure to stay out of the way of large animals, known or unknown. Sincerely submitted, TJ. Oh, what a good story. What a well thought out story. You know, I look at these stories from the story aspect. A lot of time, I know a lot of you guys are looking for information, and you know, I think our audience is kind of broke up into thirds. You've got your Bigfoot people who just love to hear about Bigfoot. And then you've got your just story people. They love to hear a story, something they can sit back and just relax and listen to. And then there's people like me who I like all of that, but I really like how people put stories together and I get to read their thoughts. It's like I get a little window into who they are. And I can tell you, TJ, you can tell from the way people write these things. TJ is probably a really nice person. She's, again, as she said, adventurous and always eager to jump out and take chances and do things. And I've been known to, I've actually been lost in the woods. I got lost at Land Between the Lakes one time for a whole day. I was turkey hunting up there. And I walked out, there are finger ridges all through Land Between the Lakes, and I was hunting, but I walked out turkey hunting. I hunted for 3 or 4 hours. I actually saw my first turkey, first time I had turkey hunted. And so I went deeper down the woods and I crossed a couple of finger ridges, and they run parallel and they branch off from each other. Hell, within 3 or 4 hours, I didn't know how to get out of there. So I knew if I started walking one direction, I'd come out on a road somewhere, and I finally did. Anyway, enough about me. The point is, if you get off the trail, I don't think it's a directional thing. Maybe it is, but you can take slight direction changes, 10 degrees to one side or the other, and you might never know it because you're not paying attention to how straight the trail is or the path is or the path you're walking. You're looking at stuff around you, and like TJ, she was hearing noises. You know, she's just walking, thinking she's going in the right direction. Maybe she was, maybe she wasn't. She just had to go farther. The point is, stay on the trail. Never get out of the boat. Always stay in the car. If there's a trail there, just stay to the trail. Don't go bushwhacking unless you're a really good bushwhacker, unless you're a really experienced outdoorsman. Even at 100 yards, you can get lost, I'm telling you. She was talking about landmarks. Landmarks, they look one way going in, but when you're coming back out, they don't look the same. They look totally different. Anyway, it's the way she presented this story, and it makes you think about these things, which means it was a great, well-written story. And I really appreciate you, TJ. This is a really good experience. Scary for you, but it's real interesting for us. Okay, I'll shut up. Let's move along. Okay, we got one story in. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you hopefully tomorrow with another podcast. Thank you.